There's a story about an audition Meryl Streep went on in 1976. She walked into a room to meet the producer, Dino De Laurentiis. He apparently didn't know she spoke Italian, so he turned to his son and said, in Italian, that she was too ugly for the part. She answered him in Italian and walked out. She didn't get the role, but the story has followed her for decades. It says something true about the gap between how Hollywood first read her and what she actually turned out to be. She was born Mary Louise Streep in Summit, New Jersey, in June of 1949. Her father worked in pharmaceuticals, and her mother was a commercial artist. The family settled in Bernardsville, a quiet suburb about 30 miles outside New York City. She was a cheerleader in high school and was homecoming queen. She bleached her hair and put real effort into being the kind of girl her school rewarded. But she had been taking singing lessons since childhood, and somewhere in that process, she discovered she could do something most people couldn't do at all. The singing led her to theater. She got into Vassar College and started taking the work seriously there. After graduating in 1971, she went to the Yale School of Drama, one of the most demanding acting programs in the country at the time. She moved to New York and began doing stage work. Off-Broadway first, then Broadway. She got cast in a Shakespeare in the Park production that put her in front of the right people. By 1977, she had her first film role, a small part in Julia alongside Jane Fonda and Vanessa Redgrave. She was on screen for maybe 10 minutes in that film. It was enough for people to notice. Within a year, she had been cast in The Deer Hunter, a much bigger production with a much more substantial part. What was happening in her personal life during those years is harder to move through quickly. She had met an actor named John Cazale. He was 7 years older than her and not famous in any conventional sense. But among people who knew the craft, he was considered one of the best working anywhere. He had been in The Godfather and The Godfather Part 2. He had been in Dog Day Afternoon. Al Pacino said he was the greatest actor he had ever worked alongside. There were only 5 films on his entire resume, and he had a major part in all 5 of them. They were a couple by the time she joined the cast of The Deer Hunter in 1977. And then, while they were still in production, Cazale was diagnosed with bone cancer. The disease had already spread when it was caught. When the studio found out, director Michael Cimino wanted him replaced. Streep said she would leave the film if they let him go. Robert De Niro reportedly backed her up. Cazale stayed in the picture. He died in March of 1978. He was 42 years old. Streep had been with him through all of it, sleeping in his hospital room, wearing his flannel shirts. She kept his clothes for a long time after he died. The Deer Hunter was released that same year, and she received her first Oscar nomination for it. 6 weeks after Cazale died, she married a sculptor named Don Gummer. That detail tends to stop people. 6 weeks is not a long time. What has been said about it, in various forms over the years, is that Gummer was a friend who had helped her through the illness and the grief. After Cazale died, she needed somewhere to stay, and Gummer had offered his apartment. She said she couldn't take it, and he told her she could stay as his wife. She said yes. Whether that's the full account or a simplified version of something more complicated, the marriage lasted on paper for 45 years. What came out in October 2023 was that they had actually separated back in 2017 and had simply kept it private. They had been living apart for 6 years before anyone said anything publicly. Her film career accelerated fast in those early years. Kramer vs. Kramer came out in 1979, and she played a woman who abandons her husband and child and then fights to get the boy back. The character makes choices that are not easy to like, but Streep found a way to make audiences understand her even when they disagreed with her. She won the Supporting Actress Oscar for it. Dustin Hoffman was her co-star, and the atmosphere between them on set was famously tense. Hoffman liked to manufacture pressure and stay in character between takes. Before one scene, he slapped her without warning. She told him that if he ever did that again, she would not be there when he came back, and that there was a name for what he had done and it wasn't acting. Sophie's Choice came out in 1982. She played Sophie Zawistowski, a Polish woman who survived the Nazi camps and was living in Brooklyn, carrying a secret about a choice she had been forced to make about her children. To prepare, she learned Polish. She also developed a specific South Carolina accent for the flashback sequences, because Sophie had picked up her English from a Southern family. The preparation was extraordinary, but it wasn't the performance. The performance was what she found underneath the preparation, the interior life of someone who survived what Sophie survived and then had to keep going. She won the Best Actress Oscar. It was her second, and she was 33 years old. For the rest of the 1980s, she worked constantly and was nominated constantly. and the two things eventually started to work against each other. Critics who admired what she did technically began using her name as shorthand for a kind of cold, calculated precision. The idea was that you could see the gears, that the performances were achievements rather than people. It was an unfair reduction, but it stuck. And it changed how some audiences came to her work. The box office reflected it too. The films were respected, but they weren't events. By the early 1990s, she was in the strange position of being the most acclaimed actress of her generation, while not quite being in demand the way she had been. The Bridges of Madison County in 1995 shifted something. It was a love story directed by and starring Clint Eastwood, and almost everyone expected it to be lesser work for both of them. Instead, she found something warmer and less guarded in the role than she had shown in years. The performance felt looser somehow, more exposed. People who had started to think they had her figured out had to revise the picture. The critical reputation kept building through the late 1990s and into the 2000s. But the real turning point came with The Devil Wears Prada in 2006. The film was a commercial entertainment about the fashion industry, not the kind of thing people expected from her. She played Miranda Priestley, a magazine editor of terrifying authority, and she could have played it as a villain and been done with it. Instead, she found the grief and loneliness underneath the power, and she delivered every line in a near whisper that was more frightening than shouting would have been. The film made over $300 million. It reached audiences who had grown up after Sophie's Choice, for whom Miranda was the introduction. It also reminded everyone who had been watching all along that she had a comic sensibility and a lightness she didn't always get to use, and that when those qualities were in the room, the effect was something different from anything she had done before. Doubt came out in 2008 and was as serious as The Devil Wears Prada was entertaining. She played a nun who suspects a priest of abusing a student, opposite Philip Seymour Hoffman. The film was designed as an argument with no resolution, and the two of them were the argument. It remains one of the better things either of them ever did. The Iron Lady came out in 2011. Playing Margaret Thatcher was a risk for reasons that had nothing to do with acting. Thatcher divided opinion so sharply that any portrayal was going to make someone angry. The film itself had problems, and most critics said so, but they also said she was extraordinary in it, which by that point had become its own kind of critical reflex. She won her third Oscar for it. At the ceremony, she made a joke about looking out at the audience and thinking they should just get it over with. It landed because it was true, and because she was the only person in the room who could say it without sounding ungrateful. She worked steadily through the years that followed. Some of it was very good, some of it was not. She played real people and fictional ones, comic parts and tragic ones, and the level of commitment she brought to the lesser projects was the same as what she brought to the better ones. That consistency was itself unusual. Then in 2023, she did something that surprised people who expected her to stay in a certain lane. She reached out to Steve Martin, one of the creators of the Hulu comedy series Only Murders in the Building, to ask if there was a role for her. The showrunners had already been thinking about her for a part, so it came together quickly. She joined for the third season, playing an aspiring actress named Loretta Durkin. She was nominated for an Emmy. She came back for 2 more seasons after that. It was a different register than most of what she had done, lighter and warmer, and she fit into it without condescending to it. The willingness to go where the work was interesting, rather than where the prestige was highest, had always been part of what made her hard to predict. The Devil Wears Prada 2 was confirmed for a May 2026 release, nearly 20 years after the original. She returned as Miranda Priestley alongside Anne Hathaway and Emily Blunt. A teaser dropped in late 2025, ending with Miranda stepping into an elevator and delivering one line to Andy Sachs, "Took you long enough." Also in early 2026, she began filming Useful Idiots with Sigourney Weaver, directed by Joseph Cedar. The two of them play old friends, which Weaver noted in interviews was the rare kind of role Hollywood rarely bothers to write for women their age. What she has said about acting, across decades of interviews, is fairly consistent. She starts from the outside, with the voice and the physical shape of a person, and works inward. She has said she distrusts pure emotional recall because it can turn a performance into something about the actor rather than the character. The people who worked with her most closely tend to describe someone who arrives completely prepared and is then completely present once the camera runs. Mike Nichols, who directed her more than once, said she was the only actor he ever worked with who could cry from one eye, not as a trick but as a choice, when the role called for it. The question people keep returning to is whether she's the finest film actress who ever worked. The nominations make one kind of argument. The Range makes another. She has played a Holocaust survivor and a fashion editor and a British prime minister and a delusional soprano who couldn't carry a tune, and in each one, she found the specific interior life of a specific human being. The preparation always disappears into the performance. The months of language study, the vocal coaching, the research into how a real person moved and sounded, all of it is there and none of it shows. You don't watch her and think about craft. You watch the person. She grew up in a New Jersey suburb and discovered she could become other people entirely. The man she loved died at 42 and she carried that. She built a life with someone else, raised 4 children, and worked at a level most people never reach once. The separation from Gummer, when it eventually came out, carried its own quiet weight because the marriage had seemed like the stable ground underneath everything else. There's no clean ending to a life still being lived, but the shape of it, when you look at the whole arc, is someone who decided early that the work was the point and held to that through grief and recognition and criticism and everything the years brought. She got told she wasn't right for the room. She answered back in the room's own language. Then she spent 50 years becoming one of the main reasons the room existed at all.